Um, Good morning. A warm welcome to the Humanist community in Silicon Valley's Sunday Forum. To those joining us on Zoom and to those joining us on Facebook, my name is Alex Havasey. I'm Vice President of the Humanist community. Humanism, the Humanist community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a secular and reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. We value freedom, health, happiness, fairness, compassion, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. If these words describe your thinking, we invite you to become a member of the Humanist community if you've not already done so. Membership forms are available on our web site at humanist.org. And by the way, there's a further description of that in the chat window. So please aid us in continuing to present these forums by donating to the Humanist community. You can find out how to donate our organization on our website again, www.humanist.org. That's humanist plural. This morning, humanist Amy Halpern-Laff will talk about sentientism. A creature capable of feeling pleasure and pain and other things associated with consciousness is said to be sentient. Sentientism is the moral view that all sentient beings have rights and interests that must be considered. Amy Halpern-Laff will present the scientific and humanistic basis for this stand. Amy is a policy and external relations director with the Factory Farming Awareness Coalition and has leadership roles in organizations promoting education equality, criminal justice reform, and civic engagement. Amy earned her, I'm open to that. Yeah, sure. I've got it here. Amy earned her BA from the University of Pennsylvania, cum laude, summa cum laude, and the JD from Stanford Law School. So Amy.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here this morning. Now, I cannot see the chat. I'm not sure exactly why, but I have to let someone in. Yes. Okay. So will somebody be calling on people? I'd really like to make this as participatory as possible.
I'll call on people when they raise their hands.
Okay, great.
Someone else could point out that if there's someone in the chat window, Scott or.
Okay, and if someone jumps in, I won't be upset, okay? Yeah. So I am a lifelong humanist, which I realize is kind of rare. Most of us have gone from some other religion or worldview to humanism, but I've been very lucky that way. That I started out, I was raised actually in the New York Society for Ethical Culture. So let's talk about sentientism, which I see as a very logical extension of humanism. What is sentientism? Well, it is a worldview like humanism or a philosophy, or some would call it a religion, but it's a way of thinking what to believe and what to care about, right? So my colleague Jamie talks about what's real and what matters, okay? And I think that's really what we're speaking about as humanists, right? We're talking about evidence, using evidence to determine what's real and thinking logically, right? Hopefully without bias. And then having compassion. And as humanists, we talk about having compassion for other humans. But why is it just humans? Why are we talking about compassion for all humans? Now, it's taken time for us to get to this point, I think. And I would say that most of the world does not have compassion for all humans, right? We're very divided. We see what's going on in the Ukraine right now, right? But as humanists, we like to think that we do. We have compassion, and our compassion has grown over time, or our circle of compassion, and to include LGBTQ people, to include people with disabilities, to include people we just really didn't know, and that social media has given us access to. So we're constantly expanding that moral circle, right? But what is it? Why have we chosen humans? Why do we draw the line there? Well, I'm going to suggest that it's because we know we are humans and we know what humans feel like, right? So I can assume that since I suffer and I can thrive as well, that you and you and you all have those experiences, right? And that pretty much any human that we meet has the ability to suffer and the ability to thrive or to flourish or even to grow. And I think that's why we talk about human worth. Even when we're talking about pretty despicable people, we think that they have the potential to grow. So, but we exclude everyone who isn't a human, at least institutionally. In our humanist institutions, we talk about moral consideration for other humans. Okay. But what about animals other than human? Don't they matter? I'm going to stop for a minute here and see if anybody has any responses to what I've said so far, because it's really pretty radical.
I don't see any hands up.
Okay. Okay. I'll continue. Okay. So here's how we develop at least the term sentientism. In the late 1700s, we've probably all heard about Jeremy Bentham, who said what matters is not can they reason, but can they suffer, right? And then we jump up to the 1970s and we have Richard Ryder, who's a psychologist who's probably not as well known as Peter Singer, at least in this context. But Richard Ryder actually coined the terms speciesism, painism, which I see I've spelled wrong, and sentientism. They were originally used derogatorily, sort of making fun of Richard Ryder and Peter Singer. And, you know, like some of the terms we pick up now, he flipped it and said, okay, yeah, sentientism, that works. And you can see this quote from Peter Singer, who of course has been very, very impactful in this movement. Some would call him the father of sentientism. He says, I'm a sentientist because all suffering matters morally, and because evidence and reason are the only ways to really understand our world. So you can see here that Peter Singer is combining those aspects of humanism that we talk about. So evidence and reason being the way that we determine what's real, right? And suffering as the way to determine what matters. And I think I would expand that to say suffering and thriving. Okay. So let's look at some of these isms. Starting with atheism, which I think most of us probably share, but obviously to get to sentientism, we have to add some morality. Animalism is just talking about animals and not about any non-animal sentience. Now, we're not really going to be talking about that today, but it's altogether possible that in the next several decades, maybe sooner, we will see non-animals in AI or transhumans that do have the ability to suffer. Okay. Painism is just talking about pain. It's measuring everything in terms of individuals' capacity to suffer. But I think it's important to add our ability to flourish as well, because that matters. Whoops, I'm letting someone in. And let's go to veganism. Veganism is really a way of being in the world. There are people who are vegan for all sorts of different reasons. And veganism simply means that people don't consume, don't eat, don't wear, are not entertained by animals or their derivatives or their products made from them. So to that, we would add naturalism. So you can be vegan as well as religious, as well as have supernatural beliefs, right? So to that, we would add naturalism and sentience. So, whoops, excuse me, I'm letting people in. Okay. Transhumanism, some of you have read about that, I'm sure. It's this idea that we can somehow freeze ourselves and be born at some later date, but it is very much human-centered, right? Then we have effective altruism, or EA. Does everyone know what that is? Yes?
No.
No, okay. Effective altruism is a very, very interesting movement. And it basically says that we should use our time and our resources to do the most good that we can. And that means to reduce suffering and to increase thriving. It also looks, it uses data to look, there's what we call long-term and long-term effective altruism. So you're measuring what's here and now, that but what will future generations suffer. So often you're looking at long-term, you're looking at the risk of existential crises, and you're looking about what will impact humans and animals other than human over many generations. So you're weighing all that data. Effective altruism also looks at tractability. So what we can do to that, you know, we're looking at areas where we can actually make a difference, okay? And also areas that are under-resourced. So, I mean, the most obvious one, I guess it's just often used as an example, is mosquito nets. Every single mosquito net that we add can prevent malaria. It's very inexpensive. It is an area that's under-resourced. So effective altruism, or EAs as they call themselves, would choose that as a way to dedicate resources. And of course, it gets very, very sticky. The way that this influences animals specifically is we talk about, say, a cow compared to chicken. So should we eat, if we ate animals, should we eat a cow, or should we eat, you know, the chicken equivalent of a cow, right? Well, obviously there are many, it takes many chickens to have the protein that you get from eating one cow. So how do you compare that suffering, right? The chickens that are suffering in factory farms as compared to a cow that spends part of her life grazing and part of it in probably a feedlot. So how do you weigh those things? And that's something that effective altruists would try to answer. Okay. Anti-speciesism. Is everyone familiar with the term speciesist? Yes, no, I don't know. Maybe not. Okay. So speciesism is the idea that we favor that we're concerned only or mainly with human suffering and not with animals. So we'll call something speciesism when it neglects to take into consideration what animals other than humans are feeling. Okay, and but that neglects, of course, human ethics. And part of sentientism is how humans act towards one another and our experiences as individuals and as communities. So what about Sentiocentrism? Sentiocentrism is similar in that it takes animals into consideration and animals' experiences, including humans and animals other than humans. However, it's not necessarily naturalistic. So it can include religions or myths. And ecocentrism and biocentrism, you could argue that that goes too far. That's sort of saying that, you know, trees matter and rivers matter in the way that animals matter. And to me, what that's saying is, you know, those rivers, trees, all that, to me, they matter in as much as they impact the experiences of humans and animals other than humans. They don't, as far as we know, they don't experience suffering and thriving. Okay, so you're looking at them as instrumental rather than intrinsic to experience. So all these sort of lead to sentientism, which, as I said, you know, I think we need to keep in mind has these two major elements. One is experiencing the world through reason and evidence, and the other is having compassion for all beings who can suffer and thrive. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
What is the meaning of the term naturalism?
Naturalism means really we are getting evidence from what we can see and learn through science. Yeah. No. Yeah. I think we are all in that category.
I was also thinking when you added eco and biocentrism, the idea that, yeah, I can see where trees are an important part of life, but you're out on the fringe there. I think architecture might come into play at much the same level.
Architecture?
Yeah, some architecture is better than others.
Absolutely. But here again, architecture is important in an instrumental way, right? Certainly our environment, both the natural environment and our built environment, can impact both humans and animals other than human. But that is an instrumental, right there, instrumental to our experiences, right?
Yeah. Okay, Jerry, you got your
I don't
hand up.
know.
Yeah, I was wondering if aliens come from another planet, would they get the same considerations that other animals do?
Why? Well, if they can experience pain and thriving, why not?
Okay.
Okay, so sentientism would include all sentience. And where I'm focusing is animals other than humans, but certainly, you know, there's room in there for other beings.
Carol or Kaparsky, did you want to talk? I see your hand physically raised.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when you say animals, Amy, do you mean the biological definition of animals? Because that would include the Plasmodium vivax, the malaria parasite, not the parasite, but the mosquito that specialized on human blood that carries that parasite is in, definition is in the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead. Sorry.
so is that it? I mean, when you say animals, do you mean just certain animals, or how do we decide which animals?
It's restricted to mammals.
Okay. Actually, I will get to that. I think the next. Yes. Which animals are sentient? So yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And the fact is, we don't really know. I mean, there are animals on the fringes, we don't think, for example, that bivalves are sentient. They don't have nervous systems. We certainly don't think that sponges are sentient. But there are a lot of animals in between, and we know that certainly mammals are sentient. We know that, certain animals we know, and certain the charismatic animals, we know they're sentient. But here's the thing, I would say that let's sort of err on the side of caution, and in terms of, am I missing, is someone saying something? Okay, let's be as inclusive as we can. And that's, and again, what you're asking, Ian, I think is more of a moral judgment, or it isn't moral judgment, as well as sort of whether these animals, mosquitoes carrying malaria, for example. Number one, are they sentient? And number two, how do we weigh their feelings or their experiences against the experiences of those who are bitten by them and who contract malaria? And how do we handle that? Is there, for example, a humane way of getting these mosquitoes of somehow morphing them into non-malaria carrying beings? So I am very much a proponent of wild animal welfare, and that's a whole different subject, I guess, but I think it matters. I think these animals matter. Okay, I think any animals that can suffer and can thrive matter. And of course, in many instances, we don't know if they can suffer and thrive. And so here are the ways I would define that, or I would begin to define the list of the animals that matter. One is that we have to be probabilistic. We don't really know, okay? So we're going to say, well, probably, these mosquitoes don't feel a whole lot, probably, but we don't really know that. We want to be prudent. So we want to be as inclusive as possible. And we want to be provisional because it's going to change. So we're going to follow the science. And if we just look at the science of the past, say, 20 years, we have learned so much more about animal sentience and what animals experience, that we can expect that over time we'll learn a lot more, and that I think we could be surprised, because we look at all the animal studies that have been done, especially when it comes to like fishes. I mean, who knew that, fishes feel? Fishes have life experiences, that many of them can recognize human faces, and even human faces they haven't seen for a very long time. So we have learned a lot about other animals' experiences of the world, and I think we will continue to. So thanks, Ian, for that. I think, we have these two questions of, can they feel, can they suffer, and also how much does it matter, and how can we weigh their suffering against the suffering of other animals? That's a moral question. So, and here's the thing, it is not a trade-off for a competition. We hear often, how can you be worried about animals, so-called lower animals, when humans are suffering so much. It's not a competition. I mean, aside from, if we stop exploiting animals in many of the most obvious ways, right? So stop factory farming, like yesterday. I mean, any situation, that justifies, cutting off animals' tails and teeth and testicles without any painkillers is clearly something that we don't want to continue, right? So if we stop factory farming, if we stop exploiting animals in the awful ways that we do, here are some human benefits. Climate change slows, right? We know that factory farms, that all farms, in fact, all animal agriculture causes climate change, especially ruminants that are emitting methane in their belches and their farts, and from their manure. So climate change slows. Natural resources, land and water, are preserved. It takes about 9 gallons of water just to slaughter one chicken, aside from raising that chicken, aside from, cleaning the farm, aside from doing all the things. So we can preserve water. We can preserve land. About 45% of our landmass is dedicated right now to domesticating animals. I mean, so we can preserve land, we can preserve water, we can also keep it clean. So the pollution from, not just from animal manure, but also from fertilizer, the fertilizer that it takes to monocrop all the grains that we feed to the animals in factory farms, okay, as those nitrates seep into the water, and that's how we end up with dead zones, right? Aside from the way it pollutes our drinking water, or many people's drinking water. The toxins that are emitted from factory farms, and the particulate matter, and the risk to humans living in those areas. So we can preserve natural resources. We can curb zoonotic diseases. So most of the pandemics that we've experienced over time have been zoonotic diseases, avian flu and swine flu and all these sorts of things. And it looks like COVID, came from apparently a wet market in Wuhan. And that comes from consuming animals that we shouldn't even be near, let alone consume. Antibiotic resistance. I've spoken with many doctors who say that we just do not have a bench. We don't have a lot of antibiotics to fall back on. And a big part of the problem is that 80% of the antibiotics in this country that we use are fed to animals in factory farms. The reason for that is that these animals are kept in such crowded and usually filthy conditions that in order to prevent them from getting sick, we feed them antibiotics. So as people consume those animals, certainly our resistance to those antibiotics wanes. And then the workers all along the chain in food production. Slaughterhouses are among the most dangerous jobs in this country. I mean, people lose fingers every single month. People lose fingers and hands and arms because they're using machinery that is meant to cut through flesh and bone. So these are terribly dangerous, very stressful conditions. People who work in factory farms and in slaughterhouses have higher rates of domestic abuse, of even suicide, than people in nearby communities that don't have these factory farms and slaughterhouses. So in many ways, it benefits us. It doesn't hurt us to consider the lives of non-human animals. So here's the thing. Humanism is dynamic. It was never meant to be a static movement, right? And here's a quote from the AHA webpage. And it says that we strive to bring about a progressive society where being good without a God is accepted and respected way to live life. We're accomplishing this through a continued refinement and advancement of the humanist worldview. So it makes sense that we would think about expanding our, what I would call our universe of obligation, right? Not just who, to whom we show compassion or we have compassion, but also, who matters and to whom we have an obligation, right? And John Dewey, who was the very well-respected, perhaps the most well-respected American philosopher of the last century, an educator, had said that we should always revisit our assumptions and our actions and reconsider them in light of, number one, scientific developments, what we now know that we didn't know, a decade ago or a generation ago. Okay, and certainly we didn't know about a lot of things. We didn't know what we do now about animal sentience. We didn't know about climate change and toxicity and all those kinds of things. So we should reconsider the way we behave and the way we view the world in light of this new knowledge, and as well in light of new socioeconomic developments. So we certainly didn't have anything resembling factory farms in the early 1900s. Now we do. It's been about 70 or 75 years since the earliest factory farms. So we have different circumstances and much greater knowledge. So I would argue that it's time for humanists to embrace sentientism. So what can we do about it? And it's the usual, we're humanists. We know what to do. We do this all the, we know how to run campaigns. So there are a few things that we can do as individuals. We can look at our own habits. We can reduce or eliminate the animal products in our, certainly in our diets, in our clothing, and just be very cognizant of our consumption. At individual societies, so this society and other humanist societies and organizations, we can, most of us are involved in some sort of social justice campaign, and this should be part of it, I think. So we can educate our members, educate our communities, and publicize our positions. And then finally, a movement-wide action. And I really think that it's time for humanists internationally to be talking about animals other than humans. Humanism doesn't just mean that we only care about humans. It also means that as humans, we have the capacity and the obligation to have compassion for any being that suffers and thrives. So, although the AHA has nothing about animals other than humans on their website, it's not in the manifestos, but the Humanism UK and Humanism International, these organizations do speak about obligations towards humanism. Not, they don't go as far as sentientism, but they do mention them, and not just in terms of, you know, nature or biodiversity. I mean, biodiversity matters a whole lot, and it matters for our lives and for the lives of other animals. But that's not talking about sentientism, where we're really focusing on the lives of individual beings and their experiences in the world. And we can do it. I really think we can make this change. I'd like to see in the next 5 years or so, humanism expand our circle of our moral circle to include animals other than human. So that's what I've got, and I'd love to have a conversation. What do people think? Casey.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, there's such a gap between the production of food and the way we eat. And I wonder if you found very good sort of on-ramps for people to connect those two things. I mean, not everybody can go and tour a factory farm or something like that, but you know, what kinds of approaches really work with people who obviously have great ties to their diet? I've always, you know, not me, but people say, oh, I've always been able to eat that. But somehow if they could see what, you know, how that food was produced. So I know there are films and stuff, but I just wondered in a general education kind of way, if there were certain approaches that work better than others to connect those two things.
Yeah, I mean, clearly education is a big piece of this. And we see this, you know, these big companies. So most factory farms are owned by, you know, huge multinational corporations.
Yeah.
And even the smaller farms are mostly under contract with those corporations. So yeah, education is a big piece of it. I think that there's resistance to that kind of education based on, well, in my experience, it's been 4 major misconceptions. And those are that, you know, vegan food or food made from plants isn't nutritionally efficient. And that's certainly, I think
some interference there.
Yeah, could somebody,
Mute the
I'm not sure if you could all mute, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So I think that's part of it. People just don't have the knowledge to know that in fact you can have a very healthy diet that doesn't involve animal products. I mean, of course you can eat junk food too. You can eat Oreos and you know, there's all kinds of vegan junk food, and most of it, you know, appears on my Facebook feed every day. There's a new one, but new and better chocolate and jerkies and this and that. Anyway, so that's one. The second is that vegan food is expensive. Right. And in fact, if you look at most people's shopping cart, the most expensive products are the fish and the meat, right? And maybe the cheese. And so vegan food for the, you know, unless you're buying this stuff, you know, you can buy very expensive vegan food. But you don't need to. Yes, I just splurged, I must say. I went to a place in Paso Robles called the Vreemery, which is a vegan creamery. And you can buy vegan cheeses by the ounce made from, you know, cashews, and they're really wonderful. But, you know, most of the time, my grocery bill, I'm sure, is quite a bit lower than most people's, certainly.
Jerry or Dana, you've had your hand up for a while.
So then the third misconception is that people can't have culturally familiar food, okay? Most foods, people have all kinds of attachment to their food. They're emotional, right? They're cultural. And I would contend that anything you can make, I can make vegan, okay? And finally, wait a minute, the causes, wait a minute, it's cost, it's health, it's culture. There's another one there. It'll come to me. Why don't we move on and that will come back to me. Yeah.
Jerry's had his hand up for a while, or Dana.
Very high.
Yeah, it's Jerry. I was thinking that, there are a lot of pet lovers in the world.
Mhm,
In fact, it seems as though some people care more about their pets than they do care about people.
mhm.
So I think you could argue that pet lovers are sort of, a step towards sentientism.
Mhm.
You would think that, but I've been wearing a T-shirt for years that says, "What's the difference?" That shows a pig and a dog, and I can walk into a dog park and people sort of nod and but they don't want to see it, and I think they don't want to see it because it requires action and once you acknowledge the fact that a pig is basically a dog, but a little smarter and, every bit as social as a dog and all those things, you really, then you have some sort of moral obligation to make changes in your life, and people don't want to see that. I mean, you even go to fundraisers for dog and cat shelters that are serving, cows or parts of cows or parts of pigs, their ribs or the legs of lambs or, I just can't reconcile all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions? Comment?
Oh,
I have another one.
yes.
Jerry? Dana? Donna?
But I have
Oh, yeah, I have a question about obligate carnivores, such as cats and dogs, that must eat protein because their digestive tract has evolved to do that
Mhm.
principle. And so how does the sentient movement deal with that?
Okay, so that's a really good question. Comes up a lot. And I don't know. I mean, the sentient movement is not as much, is still pretty nascent. So as a movement, I haven't seen people address that particular issue. The vegan movement, it's very controversial in the vegan movement. First of all, dogs are not obligate carnivores, fortunately. Anyone, I think quite a few people in this call know my dog, Zach, who has been vegan for about 8 years. And he's pretty healthy. So in fact, there's a wonderful woman-owned California company called VDog that makes vegan dog food. Dogs are not obligate carnivores.
So where does he get his protein?
It's soy, it's texturized vegetable protein.
Oh, mhm.
Yeah. So there are, at this point, 4 or 5 very high quality dog foods, vegan dog foods. Dogs seem to do very well on them. Cats, on the other hand, it gets more complicated. Cats are obligate carnivores. Now there are companies now that are working on making, in the same way that they'll make cell-based, or cultured dairy for humans. They're working on making that for cats as well. So yeah, I don't think it'll be too long from now that people can feed their cats a vegan diet.
Amy, first of all, Well, if you'd stop sharing your screen, we'd get a
Oh,
better view of
sure.
your face.
Let's see.
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, and the other thing, I just want to observe that all the things we think of as noble human traits, love, loyalty, and so on, these are all parts of the primitive brain. They're things we share with most mammals. These are the things we seem to value most.
Mhm. Yeah. We share a lot with a whole lot of animals that we don't seem to want to admit, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and the more we learn, for example, a lot of experiments have shown that there are other animals that are altruistic, right? Including rats. So if you put a rat in a cage and the rat can the rat can experience something painful like a shock, a rat will still go into knowing that that rat will experience pain. A rat will still experience that in order to rescue another rat. Okay, so we're not the only ones. Carol.
Hi, about the boundaries of sentientism, I've been wondering if, I'm sure you're aware of the literature about non-animate beings that exhibit traits that we consider like moral and so forth. For example, that trees in a forest, all these plants, which we don't know what they don't talk to us and so forth, but they take care of each other. They do all sorts of things to. There's a book called Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard, which I would highly recommend any sentientist be interested in. I mean, it sort of like takes further the work of people like Jeff Mason and Richard Warlaban, who have proven to us that animals can have feelings and morality and communications with us and each other. And this kind of makes you say, oh, actually, this might also be true of plants, or at least some plants, that they communities and they support each other. I don't know where that goes fits into your picture.
Well, I think where it goes is that if we can show that there's some reasonable evidence that trees experience things, that they have the capacity to suffer or to thrive, not necessarily the way we do, because that's always a mistake to think that if people can't, that if other animals can't feel things, don't feel pain in the way that we do, that it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. But, in many ways, my dog doesn't experience the world the way I do. He's probably colorblind. This other dog that's, I mean, there are many different ways that we can experience the world. Certainly fishes probably don't experience the world in the way we do. So I suspect that trees don't experience the world in the way we do either. If we can discover that trees do in fact experience pain, that we can cause pain, that we can encourage thriving or flourishing, then sentientism would by definition include trees, right? We want to include any beings that have the capacity to suffer and to thrive.
So that would mean that we shouldn't cut down a tree.
Right. If we discover that that's painful to them, absolutely. Not just painful to us because we can't, experience them, but painful to them. Yeah.
Ian. Question. So, it certainly seems to me very subjectively that veganism and vegetarianism and less meat is in the air and is particularly amongst younger people seems to be gaining traction. So do you have any data that supports the fact that this is going in the right direction and the demand for meat and particularly factory farm meat is being reduced, or that there's any progress being made in allow for the increase in the population? Because So I'm just asking that question. You would be more to that data than I would.
Yeah, unfortunately, the overall demand for meat is growing. Yeah, so the demand for dairy in this, well, certainly in California has gone down, and some parts of the country have gone down. Our dairy farms are shrinking. Which is a good thing. And also, many people, for all kinds of reasons, health being, among them, are choosing non-dairy milk, right? Or I should say non-dairy milk without the quotes, because it is milk. You can milk cashews, and we can milk almonds, and we can milk oats. So unfortunately, our friend Mr. Vilsack, in the years between when he was agriculture secretary for Obama and for Biden, was the head of the dairy, what is it called? Essentially, it's the export agency for dairy. And they're exporting this stuff to developing countries where, first of all, the majority of people are lactose intolerant, or one might say lactose normal. My friend Lauren at the Food Empowerment Project talks about lactose, more people in the world are lactose normal. They don't drink cow's milk. And so the idea of going to Asia and saying you need milk to be healthy you need milk from a cow to be healthy is patently absurd. We're working on legislation both in California and federally that would provide other kinds of non-animal based milk for children in school lunches, which I think is a good thing. But that's going, as well. Fortunately, our dairy consumption here is going down. Unfortunately, these dairy companies are trying to make up the slack by spreading it to countries and disrupting other countries' indigenous food systems.
Yeah, Amy, I was wondering, it seems to me I've heard recently there are state legislatures that are passing laws requiring humane treatment of animals.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to comment on that, or how widespread is that? And what do they include by it?
Sure. Unfortunately, there's no federal protection at all for animals, farmed animals. Okay. And very little in states as well. So we had a proposition, is it Prop 12, that is now the law in California, that basically says that that animals, that chickens in cages need to have enough room to spread their wings and turn around. I mean, that's still not much more than a piece of computer paper. It's not great. And some would argue, in fact, that cage-free isn't a whole lot better than caged. But so there are some welfare laws that have been passed in various states, and especially with regard to chickens, and some pigs as well. But there's still tremendous cruelty going on in every state.
When also the other thing was when you talked about providing a lot of natural habitat for animals, it seems to me that ties in with the idea that we have to limit the human population.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, the late E.O. Wilson said, I don't know if anybody's read the book Half Earth. He essentially says we should give back half the earth to animals other than humans. So, yeah, I mean, wild animals is a whole other category of animals. I I think as humanists, as humans, we have the capacity to make life better for animals other than humans. And we also don't have the limitation of saying, well, that's nature, you know, that's how it's supposed to be. We don't want to interfere with nature. We don't have that as humanists. We know that it's that nature doesn't care about us, that nature is not sort of God-given. And that if we can improve the lives of animals, of any sentient being, we should. And that would include animals in the wild who suffer, obviously, especially those who are preyed upon. So if anything that we can do, and we're starting to do things like that. I mean, we have, we rescue feral cats, and we sterilize them and release, do sterilize and release. We're starting to find ways that we can help animals in the wild. So that's that, and that is, you know, really a new field, and one that's really interesting. I think anybody who's, yeah, to read more about that, you know.
Zim, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about government policy. It's already been touched upon slightly, but I'm wondering, are there policies in place that make matters worse? And the reason I ask is because I think historically governments, maybe the American government especially, maybe not, have an incentive to make food as inexpensive as possible. So I'm wondering if that actually contributes to, you know, massive factory farming, for example.
Absolutely.
Is there?
Absolutely. And in fact, the Farm Bill will be coming up. A lot of this happens in the Farm Bill, and the subsidies that we give to these companies, you know, to the factory farms. I mean, essentially, we provide in all sorts of ways. We subsidize meat and dairy, and provide very little subsidy for fruit and fruits and vegetables. So, and that can be, can be in the forms of loans and grants and guarantees and better prices than the rest of us have on, say, water, all kinds of resources. So a lot of that is in the Farm Bill. And I'm working on that. Actually, we're starting to form some coalitions because the Farm Bill comes up for renewal every 5 or so years, and it will come up in 2023. This is a really good time to work on the Farm Bill because it's an election year with the midterms. So chances are we're not going to get a whole lot of legislation passed, although we're working on this school lunch bill, which I think is important. And quite a few bills at the state level. I focus on California, and we have a farm transformation bill, for example, to provide resources and support for dairy and meat farmers, who, ranchers who might transition to something like plants or for human consumption. So that was a bill that did not pass, but Ashkara will be bringing that back this year. There are quite a few bills that are really important, and then the federal one, the lunch bill. But I think the focus now, moving forward for the next year or so, should be the Farm Bill. And it's very difficult because these companies have a lot of lobbyists, and especially the representatives from agriculture states are, not inclined to take away some of these subsidies, which I think the farmers at this point view as entitlements.
I was actually going to ask you about, speaking of lobbyists, whether the fast food industry, how big a role that's playing in the demand, because I would imagine huge.
It's a huge demand.
Yeah.
And so we can also look at this as a food justice issue, right?
Yeah.
So, the fast food industry in this country, of course, is very, very powerful. And even though they're starting to serve the Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger and all that sort of thing, that hasn't, at least so far, cut down on the demand for meat, and that this is all meat from factory farms. So yeah, they have huge lobbyists, and you could look at it if people living in, poorer neighborhoods, both rural and urban, had access to affordable fruits and vegetables and healthier food and food that was prepared, I think that there would be less of a demand. I was in Phoenix last weekend, and there's something called salad to go, and a really good salad doesn't cost any more than a burger from Burger King. I was amazed. This is the first time seeing it. And so I think that's really important, is that we have to look at our food system holistically. So yeah, these are the huge, yeah. Very, very powerful. Other questions, comments?
One more comment. I was a little concerned when you talked about the possibility that trees might have feelings, and is that really going to change my behavior? But also, I was thinking about the branches of the religion Jainism, where supposedly when they walk, they sweep the ground in front of them so they don't step on insects.
Yep.
That strikes me as a bit extreme.
It is a bit extreme, but on the other extreme, you're starting to see things like pork roast in India. So, although, maybe the Chinese have something on us. I'd rather be too careful than,
I was talking with someone the other morning who mentioned that she had business trips to, I forget where it was, but it might have been Vietnam, but she says dog is often on the diet. And she wanted to try it, but they told her no, because especially among the young, they're aware that there's a certain prejudice against that. So they've stopped serving it. So she was told that, no, we don't serve dog anymore, but when we do, it's not a pretty dog.
Okay. Yeah, I know quite a few people who have rescued dogs that were meant to be food. Rescued them from Korea and from China. Yeah, and at least officially in some of these places, dog is no longer on the menu. I'm sure there's still, a market.
Yeah, but I see that as a response to prejudice, not necessarily a step forward for animals in general.
Right. Right. I mean, but really, what's the difference? What is the difference between eating bacon and eating, dog?
Now, I gotta admit, just hearing the word bacon makes my mouth water.
Yeah. Well, so have you experienced Esther the Wonder Pig?
No.
Esther the Wonder Pig. A couple, Scott and Derek, who live in Canada and Ontario, were given a pig that they were told was a mini teacup or something kind of pig. And they adopted this pig, and the pig grew and grew. And over time, they realized that the pig was, in fact, a commercial pig, that Esther was meant for, to be food. The vet could tell right away because her tail was cut off, and that's what they do to pigs, and that's one of the things they do in factory farms. So they adopted Esther. She grew and grew. She got to be about 600 pounds. They raised some money on, GoFundMe or one of those crowdsources. They raised about $500,000 in about 6 weeks, and they bought a farm that they turned into a sanctuary. They realized when they were serving bacon one day, they were making their breakfast, and they look at this pig and they look at the flesh in their pan, and that was it. They became vegan. Esther has been, there was a wonderful article in, I think it was Salon, that said, you know, Esther isn't unusual. Everybody knows all about Esther, and Steve has an amazing talent for putting words into Esther's mouth, and they dress her up, and she's wonderful, and people really relate to Esther. There are millions of followers. And, Esther's on, she has a website, and they have a Facebook page. It's Esther the Wonder Pig, Esther TW Pig. And anyway, so she has, you know, she has quite a following at this point, and they have many other animals in what is now a sanctuary. But this article, just it was so clear. Esther's not unusual. Esther's every pig, you know. Esther's the one we happen to know, but all those other pigs who spend their lives in cages where they can't even move around, or who have babies that they have to suckle through bars, they're not even allowed to hold their babies, you know. Esther's just a regular pig, and you know, after meeting Esther, I don't think too many people can enjoy it. Maybe they continue to eat bacon, but I don't think they can enjoy it in the same way once they get to know Esther.
Yes, pigs are people.
Other questions? Comments? I mean, I would really like to know from all of you, because you're humanists, and I want to know whether you think this is realistic, and if you have suggestions for, you know, having this be part of our movement.
It's a good question. You know, we can support organizations like your factory farming coalition.
Awareness Coalition, yeah.
Well, I'm generally
Okay.
baffled by society and what it finds worthwhile and what not, but in spite of that, it does seem to me as though there is a growing interest in treating animals more fairly. I don't know how many people are ready for sentientism, but it seems like I guess people are moving in that direction. I also had a question, which is that you said earlier that the demand for meat is actually growing, and I can see a couple of possibilities for that. Is for just individuals for some reason preferring it more for whatever reason, and another is that people are wealthier, so I mean, you know, third world countries, so that more people can afford it. Do you know what's going on? Why
Well,
the demand?
Yeah, I
Somehow.
mean, unfortunately, the demand for meat is even growing in this country. And I think fast food has a lot to do with it. Yes, certainly, you know, we set the pace for the world, and people think that they can, you know, as people have more disposable income, they want to live like Americans. And so, you know, that's what they buy, unfortunately.
But it's growing in this country. I did not know that.
Unfortunately, it is. Now, population is growing as well, so
But it's growing faster than the population.
faster than the population.
And you can feel the way meat is positioned in this country as the top of the food, you know, like when you go to the grocery store, the meat case with all its, you know, all that beautiful flesh lit up, you know, and it just makes it so clear that this is what people, they can, you know, the meat industry is telling you, you need to eat this, you know, it's the top of the food chain sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, some of the meat companies are now trying to portray themselves as being the solution rather than the cause of climate change.
How do they possibly make that
Ah,
claim? Oh, well, we don't want to know.
You don't want to know, but it's, you know, marketing. And, you know, I of course walk into Whole Foods with my little dog and hold his muzzle and say quite loudly, "Don't breathe, that's the smell of death."
Don't breathe.
But it is. I mean, if you think about all that suffering that lives in that meat case, right?
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
the result of so much suffering. And we don't need it. You know, we don't, it's not necessary. We can live perfectly healthy, you know, lives, healthy, happy, fulfilled lives without consuming other animals.
Go ahead. Ian, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I do. So one more thing. So I think we may have talked about this, but you know, there's various places around us. Here we have Hidden Hollow Farm, and we take our children to these places, and they pet goats, and they see cows and there's ducks running around. There's this image that we give our children about this lovely little farm, and you know, it'd be a hard thing to say we should take children to factory farms and have them watch that. But maybe there's something there, since you're interested in education. What are we doing wrong? I mean, obviously, that's not how it is. We're showing them a dream world, and we want our children to, you know, to like things and to have that experience of what a farm was like 100 years ago, but it's not real. You know what I mean? And
So,
go ahead.
Ian, you're absolutely right. I mean, even if it were real, like, do we really want to break up families of animals and like kill some of them? And, you know, I mean, I think even when we take children to a farm that's, you know, usually it's a petting zoo, but if it's a lovely working farm, you know, do you think they really want to eat one of those animals? I mean, you know, there's a book called, is it 10 every 10 minutes or every 7 minutes or something like that. Anyway, but it's about the idea that we really compartmentalize these things, right? So people, these kids that are petting these baby lambs and then go on to eat legs of lamb, they're not making the connection, right? So we need to help them make that connection.
Yeah, you go to the butcher and there's a cellophane wrapped thing that's a piece of food. Well, some animal, they don't connect. There's very little way to connect it with a real animal. Like when you walk down an Italian district in Boston and the butcher shop has a rabbit or a sheep corpse hanging in the window, that is a connection. You could say, oh, you know, whereas the way our meat is marketed now. And
yeah, it's yeah, I think we do need to do more education. We need to do not just education about the realities of farming and what these animals experience, but also ethical education. And, you know, I do moonlight. I am the co-executive director of an organization called Ethics in Education. So that's very important to me. And a shameless plug, my podcast is Ethical Schools. It's available on all the usual platforms. And I think the most important thing that we can teach students is to think about the impacts of all their actions, right? All of them, and on humans and animals, other than human, and the planet, and not to just keep on doing the same things over and over again, because that's what we've always done, but to very intentionally choose, you know, options in our lives that will cause the most joy and the least harm. I think that's really important. Both, you know, in the way that we live and the way that we relate to other people. And as humanists, we know that it's all about the relationships. There's never an I, it's always a we. And so I think that's very important, is having students think about those things. And what does it mean when you're, you know, what does it mean when you spend 5 minutes eating a hamburger? Like, how did that hamburger get there? What did that mean for the planet, for the humans who work in that food chain, for the animals themselves? You know, what about that glass of milk? That milk that was meant to go to a baby calf. You know, what's the calf eating now? If the calf is a boy, he's now veal. I mean, those two industries are inextricably linked. So, you know, we don't think about these things, but I think it's very important to teach students to think about these things. Was there any other comments, ways that I can make this more impactful, and ways that because I've just started speaking about sentience to various humanist organizations, and I'll be doing a lot of that in the coming months.
I have
So,
a suggestion.
yeah.
If you ended the talk with a slide that has a few suggestions of things we could do to help boost this message, or, you know, because it's when, particularly when I forget, someone said to you, well, or I guess it was Ian asked about progress, or, and it seems like there isn't that much. So you don't want to end on that bummer note, you know.
That's a really good suggestion. You're right. And certainly in humanist societies, I have had some success with implementing, for example, well, when people actually used to go to a place that they called their humanist organization or their community, Green Sundays. So that would be on the day that we meet with our communities, the day that we reaffirm our values, that we don't consume animals. And I call that Green Sunday. And quite a few humanist organizations have adopted that.
Or even places we could donate to, or people or officials we could write to, and so on. Just a couple, 2 or 3 things to walk away with, you know.
Okay, that's a very good suggestion, and that would change as, you know, like, for example, I'm working on this federal school lunch bill right now, which I think is very important. But, you know, and it changes, and we're working on legislation in California. So that's a really good suggestion, some very specific suggestions. I would like to see, you know, obviously Green Sundays in various humanist organizations. I'd like to see education. So, you know, educating our communities. I think that's really important.
Are there things we could do to make vegan food more accessible and more affordable? Because, for example, I am not a cook. I hate cooking. And a lot of the veganism that I come across involves preparing your own dish from scratch, which I'm not inclined to do. So I was wondering why there are no, for instance, vegan fast food places. Well, or, you know, making it more accessible to the average user, the average consumer, which I don't think we're there yet. It just doesn't exist.
That's really why I was so thrilled to see this salad a go-go or something, or salad go in Arizona. I've not seen that here. I mean, certainly you can go into a Sweet Greens and you can easily put together a vegan salad. Most Asian restaurants have plenty of vegan options. So there's that. And then there's always Trader Joe's. You've got a lot of vegan meals that are reasonably healthy, and all you have to do is put them in the microwave. So, yeah. We are about to get in Palo Alto. There's a wonderful vegan restaurant in San Francisco, very affordable, called Wild Seed, and they're opening in the Town and Country Shopping Center in Palo Alto. Yes.
Great.
So, yeah, that's so certainly vegan restaurants. I mean, there are more vegan restaurants, but
Jerry.
Yeah, I wanted to echo what Scott posted about Dan and I occasionally eat at Veggie Grill. We like it. I guess you could call it a fast food place, not as bad as McDonald's and all, but it's all veggie. They don't have any meat. They have stuff that tastes like meat, but they don't have any meat.
Yeah.
And there's supposed to be a few in the Bay Area, not a lot. The one that we go to is in Mountain View, in the San Antonio shopping center.
Yeah, Veggie Grills there. I mean, there are quite a few vegan restaurants, but I'm looking forward to Wild Seed.
So I have to go. Thank you very much, Amy. It was a great
Thanks
talk.
for coming.
Thanks.
Great.
It was a great talking. You gave us a lot to think about.
Okay, and anybody who, if you have suggestions or want to learn more or to help me learn more, because I really want to make this, I want to be realistic, but I do want to have humanists embrace sentientism. It just seems like an obvious extension of what we do.
Okay.
So
You wanna
thank you
put
so
your-
much for having me.
Yeah, you want to put your email on the screen one more time before you go?
Sure. Let's see, have I shared my screen? I'm not sure if I've shared it. Here, I'm gonna put this, hang on. Zoom, share. Okay, it's right there.
Okay.
Okay,
That way people who watch this, view this later will
yeah.
have it available at the end.
Yeah, and I'd certainly encourage you all to look at sentientism.info, which my friend Jamie Woodhouse runs in the UK. We have people from over 100 countries that have checked us out. We also have a wall of sentientists, both people who say that they're sentientists, and then we talk about people who are sentientists, but they don't know it yet.
Show